All right, it looks like the participants number has slowed down, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us today, guys. This is a first workshop kicking off our long-term plan discussion for our clean transportation incentives, light-duty vehicle purchase projects. I'm going to pass things to Raquel to get our very long day started. So thank you for joining us.
Great, thanks everybody for joining, and good afternoon. And today we will be kicking off a series of workshops that focus on a major update to the 3-year plan for light duty vehicle and clean transportation equity investments. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Raquel Leon, and I'm the Carb staff lead for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, or Cbrp, as well as a staff lead on this update to the long-term plan. So before we start, I'd like to walk us through some virtual housekeeping. Please make sure your name is complete and accurate as a Zoom participant. For security purposes, we cannot allow anonymous participants. The agenda and all handouts for this meeting have been posted to the Low Carbon Transportation Incentives Meetings and Workshops webpage, and I've dropped the link in the chat, but please let me know if you don't see that, and we'll find a way to get that link out to everyone. And as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. A link to the recording will be posted on the Low Carbon Transportation Incentives Meetings and Workshops webpage in the next couple of weeks. So during today's kickoff workshop for the light duty 3-year plan update, we'd like to focus on providing a snapshot of the ZEV market and our vehicle purchase incentive programs, which include Cbrp, Clean Cars for All, and financing assistance. We will have additional workshops in the coming months that will cover our progress towards a sustainable ZEV market and explore the long-term vision for our vehicle purchase incentive programs. We will start today with a series of presentations from various stakeholders to provide updates on the ZEV market, progress towards California's ZEV deployment goals, ZEV technology and infrastructure updates, and the impacts that COVID-19 has had on the ZEV market. We will then take a short break and finish off the afternoon with updates on our vehicle purchase incentive programs. So I'd like to start off by providing some background about why we're updating the long-term plan and what the plan will include. SB 1275, which was signed into law in 2014, established a Charge Ahead California initiative with the goals of placing 1 million zero and near zero emission vehicles on California's roads by 2023 in order to establish a self-sustaining market and to increase access to these vehicles for low-income consumers and those in disadvantaged communities. This target complements and provides a milestone en route to the governor's 2025 target of 1.5 million ZEVs and the larger goal of 5 million ZEVs by 2030. SB 1275 directed Carb to adopt several changes to Cbrp, including establishing income eligibility limits, which came into effect first in March 2016 and were later updated in November of 2016. SB 1275 also directed Carb to establish disadvantaged community-focused programs, such as our financing assistance program. Finally, SB 1275 required Carb to include a long-term plan for Cbrp and related programs in the fiscal year 2016-17 funding plan, and to update it every 3 years through January 1st, 2023. This workshop is the first step to start the update process for our second major update to the plan, which will cover the timeframe of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2025. This plan must include a 3-year forecast of funding needs to support the goals of technology advancement, market readiness, and increased consumer acceptance of zero-emission vehicles. Recognizing the uncertainty in forecasting a highly dynamic market over an extended period, SB 1275 states that this forecast may be described as a range with high and low funding levels, as we have done in previous years. The second element is a market and technology assessment for each vehicle technology available to inform the appropriate funding level, incentive type, and incentive amount moving forward. The long-term plan also requires an assessment of when a self-sustaining market is expected and how existing incentives may be modified to reflect changes in future market conditions. SB 1275 requires the plan to be updated at least every 3 years, as I just mentioned. And Carb staff have re-examined funding need forecasts every year since fiscal year 2016-17 in each annual funding plan. And this year we are providing a more comprehensive update to the plan. In addition, the supplemental report of the 2018-2019 Budget Act requires Carb to update the Cbrp forecast annually until January 1st, 2030. And as part of the forecast, include the total state rebate investment necessary to facilitate reaching the goal of placing in service at least 5 million zero-emission vehicles by January 1st, 2030. Annually updating the Cbrp forecast until 2030, projecting sales figures of electric vehicles, and assessing marketing efforts of electric vehicles by automobile manufacturers, among others, are the top 3 elements of the budget bill language that also intersect with the requirements of SB 1275. So therefore, we have chosen to cover both things through the same process. Some of the main ZEV market goals that this plan takes into consideration include our various ZEV deployment goals and additional ZEV market goals that have been added since the first iteration of this plan, which include the requirement that all new vehicles sold in California must be electric by 2035 and a complete fleet turnover to electric by 2040. We also know that in order to reach these and other climate goals, it will be critical to increase EV adoption among priority populations across California. It is also important that we keep these goals in mind as we progress to the update for the long-term plan and how we can best support them through regulations and incentives. The format of the long-term plan will be similar to updates of the past, as there are key areas we are required to include. We will work on a 3-year funding forecast for our vehicle purchase incentive programs based on program demand in recent years and market indicators. Staff will be holding project-specific public working groups where they will get into the weeds of projections and will be seeking stakeholder input on forecasting methodologies. We will also continue to evaluate when a self-sustaining EV market may be reached in California, and we will provide updates to indicators that have been identified in previous iterations of the long-term plan, and will be seeking stakeholder input on additional indicators to evaluate. We all know how dynamic the ZEV market is, and due to this, we cannot provide an exact timeline as to when we will reach a sustainable ZEV market, but we can analyze what market indicators are signaling for the future of the market. We will also provide updates on battery and fuel cell system and storage costs, as well as the incremental costs of plug-in electric vehicles. A very important factor to support a sustainable ZEV market is the availability of charging infrastructure. So we will be providing an update on where California stands and the growing network of public charging infrastructure. We will then take a look at the status of ZEV technology and exciting vehicles on the horizon that will expand the function and use of EVs. Along with this will come a deeper dive into consumer preferences and a strong focus on ensuring an equitable transition to electric. As the new EV market has grown, so has the used EV market, and staff will expand on analyses into the status of the used ZEV market and its role in the transition to electric vehicles. Throughout the whole process, we will be examining recent and ongoing research and plan to highlight current research in our workshops. As we analyze the ZEV market and what's to come, we will use this information to assess how our vehicle purchase incentive programs could be modified based on changes in market conditions and a shift away from a focus on the mass market to a primary focus on priority populations. Carb will be kicking off a separate but coordinated effort to update the long-term plan for our clean mobility investments. The first workgroup meeting will be held next week on Thursday, February 17th. At this meeting, staff will provide clean transportation equity investments highlights, including those for Clean Mobility Options Pilot Program, Clean Mobility in Schools, Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, Access Clean California, Outreach Workforce Training and Development, Community Transportation Needs Assessments, and Technical Assistance and Capacity Building. Staff will also provide an overview of the planned fiscal year 2022-23 Clean Mobility Long-Term Strategy process. Additionally, a number of work group meetings will be held to do a deeper dive on critical program changes in support of the fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan development. The timing of these meetings is tentatively scheduled from February to May of this year. So before we move on to our next agenda item, I did want to pause here and see if there were any questions on this introductory material. My colleague, Bianca Marshall, will help us handle any questions or comments that are coming in. Again, please use the raise hand function or #2 if you're calling in by phone, or submit your question or comment using the Q&A box on Zoom. And as a reminder, please state your name and affiliation before asking a question or making a comment. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Bianca to see if there are any raised hands.
Thank you, Raquel. At this time, we have no questions or raised hands.
Well, we will circle back to that. Then we'll have plenty of time for questions throughout the day as we progress. So now we will move into our next agenda item. And this will be providing updates to the ZEV market and technology assessment. We'll start the conversation off with a snapshot of the global and US EV markets before we hear from an update on California's EV market from CNCDA. The global EV market has exploded in the last 10 years, and by the end of 2020, there were over 10 million EVs on the world's roads. Purely battery electric vehicles accounted for 2/3 of the global EV stock. The top global EV fleets include China with over 4.5 million EVs, Europe with over 3.2 million EVs, and the United States with over 1.8 million EVs. A deeper look into the US EV market shows that we've experienced significant growth over the last few years. Over 295,000 new plug-in electric vehicles were registered in the US in 2020 alone, and battery electric vehicles accounted for a majority of this total. The all-electric market share in the US grew to nearly 3% through Q3 of 2021, which is up from 1.8% in 2020. The top states with the highest plug-in electric vehicle share include California, Texas, Florida, and Washington, which together account for more than half of the EVs in the United States. So now I'm going to turn it over to Anthony Bento from the California New Car Dealers Association, or CNCDA, to provide an update on the EV market and share insights from the dealer perspective.
Thank you, Raquel, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I think that we're going to load up the slide deck shortly, so it should be available. Just a moment. My name, by the way, is Anthony Bento. I'm the Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs at the California New Car Dealers Association. And some of the material that I'm going to present on is a little duplicative of what it was already presented, but from a slightly different angle, and happy to answer any questions from the audience. All right, so I think we could move to the next slide. So a lot of this is review, but based on what Raquel was talking about, that clearly China and Europe are global leaders, and that was definitely seen in 2021 sales. I think it's noteworthy that there are laggards, though, globally, and in particular, fairly large or very large nations, including Brazil, India, and Indonesia. EV shares are below 1%. In Japan, it's about 1%. So the United States is certainly not at the bottom of the pack or anywhere near the bottom of the pack on EV sales. And California is certainly a global leader. Next slide. And this is being driven by, I think would come to very little surprise to anyone on this call, by various governmental mandates throughout the world, which have been most aggressively implemented in Europe, China, and of course here in California, and to a lesser extent by the federal government. The automakers have announced over the past 18 months or so, there's been a enormous amount of announcements from automakers on the tremendous amount of investments that they're making in EV production. The transformation that we're contemplating here with 100% ZEV sales by 2035 is the most substantial change that the retail automotive industry has ever experienced. It's by far, it requires enormous investments, and the manufacturers are making those investments and in the creation of new facilities, new factories, et cetera. And those are hopefully going to be starting to come online in the coming years, so we can achieve the goals that are set out by the Air Resources Board, as well as other governmental entities throughout the world. Next slide. One of the problems, though, that we're currently encountering is a tremendous shortage of vehicles. It's just earlier today, inflation numbers came out. I think that it's the highest that a period of goods inflation, or consumer price inflation, that any of us, or certainly I've experienced in my lifetime. Some of the folks that have been around a little bit longer certainly remember the inflation of the 1970s and early 80s. I don't, but so this is a different situation. It's one that I've never personally experienced, and I think it's not within the living memory of a lot of folks that are alive today. And we're seeing that in vehicle prices, that the MSRP of vehicles has increased dramatically, including EVs. That just a few years ago, Tesla, and this is just an example, they made a big push to have a $35,000 Model 3. That was a target. The base level Model 3, if you price it out on their website now, is about $45,000, which is a substantial change over the past 3 years. The huge wait lists that we're seeing for vehicles, for I think the first time for a lot of automakers, there's incredibly desirable EVs that are coming out. The F-150 Lightning has definitely attracted a lot of attention, but it's received over 200,000 reservations, and there's an over 3-year wait for the one currently. So there's a definite mismatch between the amount of demand that is being expressed in the marketplace and the supply of these vehicles. And new vehicle inventory on dealer lots is practically non-existent, whether that's ZEV, EV, or ICE vehicles. It's hard to come by a dealership with a meaningful amount of new vehicles in inventory. They typically get sold almost instantaneously after delivery. So it's a difficult time to be a purchaser of a vehicle because of the current market conditions. Next slide. And as a result of that, it's created massive inflation in the price of vehicles, that supply demand mismatch. And we're seeing that with new and used vehicles, both electric or EV and non-EV. So I have some stats up here that talk about the average selling price for new and used vehicles as well as EVs. They are dramatically up, somewhat less so for new EVs, although certainly a 6.2% increase is not anything to kind of disregard. It is a little bit more muted than what we're seeing in some other areas, but the price, if anyone out there has been in the marketplace to purchase either a new or used vehicle, certainly noticed dramatic increases in price, which is helpful if you're looking to trade in a vehicle or sell a vehicle, and much less so if you're trying to purchase one. And yeah, hopefully the trend is going to be that there will be a normalization in price increases, and with the availability of microprocessors that many vehicles today, in particular electric vehicles, but all vehicles, they contain over 1,000 microprocessors. And as a result of that, the microprocessor shortage in particular has acutely affected the industry. And when we've seen with a shortage of new vehicles, that has downstream effects on the used vehicle marketplace, because customers that would be interested in purchasing a new vehicle are driven out because of a lack of availability. Instead, they're purchasing a 2 or 3 year old, perhaps an off-lease vehicle. The customers that used to purchase that are driven down further to older vehicles or more affordable vehicles. So it creates a substantial concerns for in particular lower and more moderate income customers, because they're the ones that are in the most difficult situation when there's a lack of availability of affordably priced vehicles. Next slide. So finally, just looking towards the future, we're expecting relief later this year. Many automakers, I think Ford and GM, have announced that they're expecting relief on the microprocessor shortage later this year. Some other automakers are a little bit more cautious, thinking that it's going to take into 2023 until things normalize. And there are, as I'm sure other folks on here can opine on to a greater degree than I, some concerns about the supply of key materials for the construction of EVs moving forward. So if you just pick up a newspaper or browse any sort of financial or business news, you probably have seen substantial increases in lithium prices. There's concerns about the high degree of reliance we have as an industry on China for the production of key components of electric vehicles in particular. And so, yeah, there's, I think, some questions moving forward. A key for, I think, in particular, when we're thinking about transportation, affordable transportation in economically disadvantaged communities, is make sure that vehicles are available at prices that they can afford. And we're really looking forward to, certainly as an association and as an industry, for a normalization in the supply of vehicles, in particular new vehicles, to result in a situation where these price pressures moving prices upwards are less acute. So with that, I think we can move to the final slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. This is Bianca, here to moderate Q&A. I see we have one raised hand, and it's from Gilbert Castillo. Gilbert, I've unmuted your line, so feel free to speak up.
Actually, didn't have a question. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right, because we have Walter Simbab next. Walter, I've unmuted your line.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Wally Simbab, South Bay Cities Council of Governments. And gosh, these prices are really daunting. And I'm wondering, I keep getting baffled by the fact that we know that 70% of our trips in the South Bay cities are under 3 miles. And to me, the obvious conclusion would be, I mean, we have 800,000 vehicles on the South Bay. And if even the average price is 40,000, we're looking at a $3 trillion consumer investment in order to turn the fleet over by 2035 or 40, whatever we were talking about. That's clearly never going to happen. So given that you have an e-bike rebate program coming up, and we're hoping to extend that to other kinds of micromobility devices, including neighborhood electrics, that's the only way this is going to be affordable. So I'm wondering why the forecasts aren't taking a look at the bottom end of the market as a way to move the needle on these things. These goals are not attainable with the current strategy, would be my observation. I wonder if Mr. Bento would comment on the bottom end of the market and what we can do about it.
Well, I can comment a little bit on it. My expertise is not in, and I wouldn't feel comfortable commenting from Carb's perspective with respect, or really with respect to e-bikes. That's outside my expertise. But what we have seen on the low end of the marketplace for vehicle, the light duty vehicle sales is that the bottom end of the market has shifted. Instead of it being $5,000 vehicles, it's $10,000 vehicles, and the used vehicles that customers purchase are that used to be affordable for a person of a certain income are no longer there, or certainly not there to the same degree. So with a lack of supply comes increased prices. And I think that ultimately, from my perspective, the only remedy is more supply, or alternatively, people can choose different options for their transportation needs. But if they're looking for a light duty vehicle for their transportation needs, that we need ultimately more inventory. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that as of yet. But I'm not sure if anyone else on the call can comment on the bikes or any other options that might be available, or Carb strategy on that.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Anthony. So we actually got a question from Plet Kanan. He asked, can you talk about lower cost new EVs coming to the market late 2022, so this year or next year? Thanks.
Yeah, that there's quite a few actually that are coming down the pipeline. I think that the ones that immediately come to mind are Toyota and Subaru are working together jointly on a vehicle that's going to be badged differently, and aesthetically it looks a little bit differently. I think price has actually not yet been announced for that vehicle, but there are a number of vehicles, I'd say in the low 30,000s or mid 30,000s that are coming online and are of a class of vehicle that customers are more interested in. That I think one of the problems that we encountered with some of the more affordable EVs in years past is because of the size or range concerns. They didn't really match with what consumers were demanding. And what we're starting to see is the kind of small SUV marketplace, which is incredibly hot. Customers are really interested in these types of vehicles. They provide, I think, a lot of utility to customers. Clearly, there's a substantial desire for them. That those are coming online. And I think in the 30,000s, or starting in the 30,000s, and with the availability of additional incentives, both at the federal level and the state level, that could bring the cost down even further. So that brings those vehicles pretty close to cost parity with an ICE vehicle. So I think that we're going to see some substantial demand for these vehicles that are that we should be seeing in the next 18 months. I think in the Subaru and Toyota case, the reservations are open now, or that they're opening, and for these vehicles, and they should be available later this year. With other vehicles, like we've seen tremendous success and popularity for the Ford Mach-E, which I wouldn't say is like an entry-level vehicle, but certainly in the more affordable range, pretty close to the average for a new vehicle in terms of price. Again, if you include the federal and state incentives, we get pretty close to cost parity. So there's some really exciting vehicles that are coming down, becoming available. And frankly, I think the biggest concern that I have is just availability in the near term, and that there's going to be a mismatch between supply and demand for the next few years, where you might need to be on a waiting list for a frustratingly long period of time before being able to purchase the vehicle that you're interested in. But there's been an enormous shift, and very exciting to see where vehicles used to be EVs used to be a little bit less desirable for the general kind of automotive public and appeal to people that were more interested in the environmental benefits of it. Now I think it's starting to shift towards people that are just interested, less in the environment and more just interested in the utility that it presents, the cost savings that it presents, and they're frankly really fun to drive. So there's definitely been a shift, and I think we're going to see major mass market inroads in the next few years.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next raised hand, and that was by Lonnie Mason. Lonnie, I've unmuted your mic. You can speak.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for calling on me. My name is Lonnie Mason, the Executive Director of First Generation Environmental Health and Economic Development, based out of the Bayview Hunters Point community. The information we just heard is alarming. It concerns me, because when we talk about overburdened, disadvantaged community being able to afford any of these vehicles, because when you say everything has drastically gone up, the prices on the used cars has gone up as well. Not only that, the food in your grocery store, everything has gone up in this pandemic. So my concern is, how is Carb going to deal with this? Are we going to deal with this in regards to a higher rebate when it comes to overburdened, disadvantaged community being able to afford this? Because not just the prices of vehicles, electric vehicles, or any vehicle at that matter, has gone up. Food has gone up. Anything with gas prices has gone up. But I mean, it wouldn't affect, unless you get a hybrid electric, you wouldn't have to worry about gas prices too much, but still you have to charge. And there's still an issue there when it comes to disadvantaged community being able to charge their vehicles up in their own communities. But this is an issue. How is Carb going to handle this process when it comes to overburdened, disadvantaged communities being able to afford any of these vehicles? And, based on the information at the California State Assembly, some of the things that was said there, it's an issue. This is a problem. So you're talking about down the road, 2-3 years down. We're talking about now. What can we do now? That should be the focus. How can we handle this and manage this now? Thank you.
Thank you,
Lonnie, for those comments. And I think what's really important about workshops like this and hearing this information is that it really does help us inform our decisions in the coming months as we look to make changes to our incentive programs. It'll help inform what rebate amounts should be, especially for those with the lowest incomes and those residing in disadvantaged communities. So I think it is important to take this step back now and kind of really analyze where the market is and the conditions overall that folks are experiencing, and that'll really help inform the decisions we'll be making in the next few months on these projects.
Okay, we'll see.
Thanks, Raquel. So we have one raised hand, one question, one comment. I'm going to read the comment, ask the question, and then Eileen, I will call on you after that. From Steve Douglas, Nissan Leaf S starting MSRP is at $27,400, and with the $7,500 tax credit, that reduces it to $19,900. And the question from Jonna Valentine is, can you comment on how dealers are affected by these market constraints? Do you see dealers adjusting their business models or practices?
Yeah, so there's been conversations, and certainly between dealers and manufacturers about lower inventory levels in the future. And the dealers, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but they incur a cost for just having vehicles on their lot. They need to insure them. They need to, what they refer to as flooring. So there's, I think one of the long-term trends that we might see out of this is perhaps a reduction in the number of vehicles on a dealer's lot, and more vehicles available from perhaps central stock that is held by the manufacturer. That may vary based upon the manufacturer, but there's definitely going to be, I think, long-term, like everything else that we've experienced in this pandemic. I know my life personally has changed quite a bit. I think the lives of a lot of folks, with remote work, not being able to travel as much, and there's just been a huge number of effects that all of us have experienced. That masking, everything. So it's been a big shift, and the same thing's true with dealers. I think that there's going to be lasting impacts based upon this experience that we've had. One of them may be lower inventory levels at the dealership. Of course, there could be various others as well, and hopefully not one of them is elevated prices moving forward. I'm really hopeful that we're going to see a better supply demand equilibrium, but it might take some time, unfortunately. So, but yes, there will be shifts for sure, and that this is also coinciding with the trend towards electrification as well. That dealers are investing quite a bit in electrification. Just if anyone's been involved in the installation of a level 3 charging facility or charging station, you know that there are huge costs associated with that. And in addition to service bay upgrades, although electric vehicles don't need oil changes, they do need service, and the service that they require is in many ways requires more advanced or highly trained technicians than or specialized technicians than are currently available. So there's a lot of things that are going on right now, and perhaps some permanent shifts that we're starting to see.
Good point. Thank you. Eileen, I just unmuted your line.
Thank you. This is Eileen Tutt with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. And thank you for this workshop. I think this is a really timely discussion, and appreciate this opportunity. I just want to say that one thing, Raquel, that you said at the top of the meeting really caught my eye and my attention, and then Anthony's report out kind of exaggerated. That is that Carb is looking at shifting this Cbrp program from the mass market to priority communities. And my sense is, I mean, I guess what I'm going to ask is, one, I think that Carb has made this shift already. In fact, the low and moderate, all these programs are the low and moderate income bump ups, the MSRP caps, the income caps, all of which, just so you know, because I'm sure this will come as somewhat of a surprise, we support. We think that it's important to have these structures in place, especially as we've now exceeded 10% of the new vehicle market. What we don't want is changing requirements so frequently. And that's what, wait lists and all these constant modifications, these programs have really impacted this program. But one thing that just struck me is we are nowhere near mass market. Just to be really clear, these early incentives are the early adopters, and we're starting to get to the fast followers, right? That's where we are. We're not anywhere close to mass market. So, and we now we're also nowhere close to meeting our 5 million goal, although I think the state should be super proud of the fact that we actually exceeded our 1 million goal, and I think we'll exceed our 1.25 million goal, our 1.5 million goal. But I don't know if we'll hit the 5 million goal, and I think that is kind of an indication of once you pass that threshold, you could possibly suggest that we're now looking at really mass market vehicles. But to suggest that we're shifting away, from mass market is just not quite, in my opinion, the right characteristic, because we're nowhere near mass market. I do completely support, and CalETC has long supported, the shift to priority communities, which is happening. And I really appreciated the conversation with the gentleman from Hunter's Point, who rightly suggested that we may need vehicle incentives or programs like the Clean Cars for All and used vehicle incentives. But I do want to just point out that what we've seen in this early adopter and perhaps fast follower market is the incentives that these folks have gotten pass through to the used vehicle market. So that's why you see these residual values for used EVs that are actually some of the lowest cost cars on the market. In fact, if you can afford a used electric vehicle with these incentives, probably more easily than you can, well, certainly more easily than you can a gasoline vehicle. So these new vehicle incentives, no matter who gets them, although I think Carb has rightly put in place some restrictions so that we look at middle-class folks and low and moderate income folks getting them, but those incentives do pass through to the secondary market. And so there's a really important, and especially in this early market, there's a really important benefit to providing incentives for middle-class folks and moderate income communities to make a decision to purchase an EV, because what we're trying to get to is mass market. And I will tell you that there are just a lot of people who are really hesitant to even consider an EV. And when you add an incentive, that has been shown, throughout history to be the most effective way of not only doing kind of outreach and education and making people aware of the vehicles, but also getting people just to the top of the funnel, thinking about it. Maybe we would consider it. And if we did, we'd get $1,000, right? I mean, so there's just, I think we underestimate the value of incentives for middle-class families, middle-class households, and moderate income households. And to the degree that they benefit low-income households or households in communities that are particularly impacted. So I'm just wondering, when you say we're shifting, do you mean like we're going to end the program for middle-class and moderate income people? Or I guess I was a little confused by that, because especially coming off of Anthony's presentation, are you saying that we are going to, what do you mean? And I know you're going to get to this, but I just thought that was interesting. And if there's any consideration by Carb in how these middle class incentives and moderate income incentives help with the used car market and market acceleration in general.
Thanks, Eileen. I think that based on the way that we're looking at the budget allocation we received last year, our goal is to phase down slowly. So it is not to end incentives for the middle class market right away. That's not our goal by any means. However, we recognize that more needs to be done in the low income communities. More needs to be done to make sure that we are really reaching those consumers that haven't traditionally been reached with these types of programs. And to the comments we heard earlier, maybe that is additional incentives, more money, and we can only accomplish that if in fact we are looking at how we scale down in other areas. And so part of our goal this year is to continue the conversation from last year and find ways to continue to shape the program as we go forward. And we will talk a lot about this, I think, a little bit more in today's presentations as well. We are running a little low on time for this particular session. There was another hand raised and it just dropped, but I want to make sure that we catch it if there was still interest in that question, because it was raised for quite a while. I think it was, yeah, Lonnie, Bianca, you want to manage the?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Lonnie?
Yes, it was me, and it was regards to the other young lady. I don't know if she heard the audit report, from the state assembly in regards to low income, overburdened, disadvantaged communities, because they didn't receive that money. They didn't get it. Definitely the community that I live in did not receive those benefits. And so it is important that we, structure it around those who are disadvantaged. Now, the middle class, if you look at the audit, they received quite a few Teslas. The community that you're talking about, due to the audit report. So if you get some time, go, it's public record, you can listen to it, that they received their portion, that portion that should have went to low income disadvantaged communities who did not receive the funding to be able to assist those individuals to have an opportunity to benefit from the program, because the money, apparently, as they said, the money had ran out. But from my understanding, we have a surplus now. Am I right? Am I correct? It's just that how much are they willing to give in regards to a rebate to those individuals? That's the key. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. Really appreciate your participation.
All right, so we're going to transition now. Thank you, everybody, for the questions and comments. That was great. I'm going to hand it over to John Anderson now with the Center for Sustainable Energy to go over our progress towards meeting the ZEP goals. John?
Thanks, Raquel. Share my screen here. All right, is everyone seeing my slides? Take the silence as a good sign. Okay, hello everybody. I'm John Anderson with the Center for Sustainable Energy. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about updated market.
John, I can't see your slides right now. I don't know if it's.
Thank you.
Can anyone else see it?
No, I cannot.
Yeah, it says you've started screen sharing, but it's just black.
Resume share. Is that working now?
There we go.
All right. Thanks for the heads up. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about updated market and Cbrp demand projections, along with some market indicators that we've been keeping an eye on. I'll start off with some thanks to Francis Alvarez for producing many of the projections that we're about to talk about, and others at CSE for their support in producing this work. All right, so we'll start with a brief overview of the methods and some updates about changes that we've implemented in the forecasting since the last time these projections were updated last August 2021. Then we'll go over the rebate demand forecast, followed by a look at the EV market's progress relative to the state volume targets that Raquel outlined earlier. And then finally, we'll look at some EV market share and vehicle share metrics relative to some additional targets for those EV market share and fleet share metrics. So the forecasting method uses a tool set called Profit, which we've used to forecast based on a combination of historical data and modeled impact of external factors. And you can see a pretty detailed look at that forecast methodology by looking at the presentation that I've linked to on this slide. The underlying projections now include rebate applications received from the start of the program through December 2021. And the EV sales data similarly spans the beginning of the program through October 2021. Worth noting here that Tesla has made up a large portion of both sales and rebate totals in recent months, accounting for up to 70% of the overall program in some recent months. And as such, the programs are especially sensitive to changes from Tesla sales and rebate totals. And some of the market conditions that Anthony mentioned earlier lead me to suggest that we keep a close eye on these forecasts as new data become available and we're able to add those new data into the forecasts. But to help account for some of that high leverage on that a small number of vehicles has on the overall projections, we've added seasonality to the forecasts to account for seasonal swings in application and sales volumes. We've also previously been modeling the impact of the Clean Fuel Rewards program on both the market and the rebate application demand. And those data are now sufficiently captured in the historical data that we can use the actual observed data to account for its impact rather than the modeled results. So that's a change that's been made as well. And we've also added the board approved program changes into the rebate forecasts that we're going to present now. That brings us to the results, which I'm showing here on the slide. So here we're looking at historical and projected rebate funding demand over time by vehicle category. The red line with the ribbon around it is general rebate funding demand, which includes standard individual rebates as well as fleet rebates, both the increased rebates for fleets operating in DACs and standard fleet rebates. And then the green line shown on the slide without the ribbon is indicating the historical and projected demand for increased rebates for low to moderate income consumers. So focusing first on the general rebate demand here, we're seeing a decrease in standard rebate demand over time in the forecasts. And as we proceed with the long-term plan development, we should keep an especially close eye on that. You can see decline in overall funding demand through middle of 2024, and with the step down at the beginning of 2023 when the next round of program changes is scheduled to take effect. Then switching over to the low to moderate income increased rebates shown here with the green line surrounded by the ribbon, we see a trend of slow but steady growth over time. So this is kind of the shape of the projections. We'll switch over now to talking about the total estimated demand. And from January to June 2024, we're projecting a total funding need of $289 million in the middle scenario, with estimates ranging from $155 to $375 million, depending on how things fall within the error bands that we've estimated here. With $403 million remaining as of January of this year, these forecasts show the program ending June 2024 with a surplus. Do want to reintroduce a sense of caution about these results. A change in the overall participation levels could have a major impact on the estimates. So we should view the surplus estimates with that number or with that caveat in mind. And I do also want to note that Carb's planning to use these estimates to take a deeper look at that second phase of program changes during the work group meetings planned for later in the spring. So next we'll look at the market projections. We've used a similar methodology to the rebate demand projections to project the market. And on this slide, we're looking at cumulative new EV sales over time represented by the solid black line. And then we take the middle EV sales forecast through 2024 and extend that out into the future, out past 2030, and assume no changes to that forecast. We get the dashed or the solid green line here. We've also added 3 purple stars to the graph to represent the 3 volume-based targets that Raquel outlined earlier, the 1 million by 2023 target, 1.5 million by 2025, and 5 million by 2030. And as you can see, the trend is showing an optimistic trajectory relative to those state goals. These forecasts estimate that we may hit all 3 targets if the market follows the middle projection. So this is encouraging compared to some past forecasting. And even though the market supply is constrained, as we heard earlier, the EV market appears to be bouncing back from the pandemic in an encouraging way. I think it's worth, again, restating a need for cautious optimism here. The further out into the future, the more uncertain the forecasts become. But indications from the forecast are showing a positive trend in terms of cumulative sales. And with that, we can turn to another metric, of market transformation that we've been keeping an eye on. And instead of looking at projected cumulative new EV sales, we can look at observed EV market share. And on this slide, we're looking at a 3-month moving average of EV market share among new light-duty vehicle purchases, represented by the blue line here. And that blue line is shown relative to 2 dashed lines indicating the 16% market share threshold that was identified in past long-term planning efforts by Carb and the 100% market share target by 2035 set forth by Governor Newsom. And we can see here in the recent months, upward trend in EV market share to the point where we've nearly reached that 16% threshold for overall EVs as a percentage of light-duty vehicle sales. There's some variation in success among different market segments, which we'll talk about in a minute. But like the cumulative sales goals, the short-term picture is somewhat optimistic in terms of EV market share. That said, of course, as you can see on this graph, we still have a long way to go before we reach that 100% market share target. So turning first to a even more optimistic picture of a subset of the market, if we look at the IHS market defined hatchback body style of vehicles, which include EVs like the Nissan Leaf, the Toyota Prius Prime, Chevrolet Bolt, and the Tesla Model S. Hatchbacks classified by IHS are well above the 16% market share target. But again, we still have some distance to go before we hit 50%, let alone the 100% target. I think there's still more work to be done among the SUV segment, and SUV market share is also trending upward, but still well below the 16% threshold. And EV markets are only just starting to reach the EV pickup trucks, rather, are only just starting to reach the market. Market share for trucks remains effectively zero for the time being for the data that we have available here. Additionally, there's still substantial work to be done among priority populations to increase adoption of EVs. Those living within disadvantaged communities, we're looking at market share for DACs here. And we're seeing similar encouraging signs in terms of the trajectory, but the DAC market share still lags behind the state as a whole. And then one final metric I'll touch on here is EVs as a percentage of the light duty vehicle fleet in California. So this is EVs as a percentage of all registered vehicles. And as you can see, EVs are still making up less than 10% of the fleet in California, according to data from the California Energy Commission. And I estimate that at least an additional 13 million sales might be needed to reach a 50% light duty vehicle market, assuming the overall number of vehicles in California doesn't change over time, let alone the 85% threshold that was suggested as a pathway in the 2020 mobile source strategy. So to sum up, we've made some significant progress, and recent trends are showing positive signs for both EV sales and market share metrics, but there's still significant work to be done in terms of increasing market share and the overall number of EVs on the road in California. Thanks for your time and attention. Happy to take any questions about these slides.
Thank you, John. We do have a raised hand from Walter. Walter, I've unmuted your line.
Hi, terrific presentation. These are great data. We pay for pulp data for 5 or 6 years. So we have a series of data on all the models, EVs, ICE, all of it. I can't stress enough the importance of having that if local jurisdictions are going to meet their targets. And so I would like to propose to Carb that something that you think about doing is providing access to that. Now, I know that I think DMV or somebody is starting to do that, but they don't include the NEVs in the lower end of the market. And it's important that we track all sales, particularly with the e-bike rebate coming up. But so anyway, that's a suggestion that we all need the data if we're gonna come close. That's how I know there's 800,000 vehicles that we have, and starting to replace all of them is like unfathomably difficult. The question though is, in addition to that, can you give me the rate of growth that's embedded in the curve that you showed, the absorption curve, in order to meet the targets? Because I can take that rate of growth then and begin to look at and track year by year whether or not how we're doing compared to what's necessary to meet the state goals. So is that possible that you could tease that out and share it?
In terms of the fleet share?
Yeah, in terms of the market share. The curve you showed goes up. It's a logarithmic curve. What's the rate of growth that's expected to follow that curve?
Yeah, thanks for that suggestion. I don't have that at hand at the moment, but I can definitely add that into our future updates of the projections.
Thank you.
I'll make a note of that.
Bianca, do we have any other raised hands?
It does not look like we have any raised hands right now.
So thank you, John, for that presentation. Again, we will have time later on for questions if anything does pop up. But for now, we're going to move on to our next presentation. And I'm going to invite Reinhardt and Andrew Martinez, both with Carb, to provide a brief update on ZEV technology.
All right, I'm going to try to get this going here. All right, can everybody see the slide up there?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Ryan Hart. I'm a air air pollution engineer in the Sustainable Transportation and Communities Division in the Advanced Clean Cars branch, and we're currently working on the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rulemaking. And I'll pass it over to Andrew to introduce himself as well.
Hi, thanks, Ryan. And yeah, I'm Andrew Martinez, hydrogen program expert in the zero emission infrastructure section, same branch and division as Ryan. Most of my work does focus on light duty hydrogen fueling infrastructure, but for today's presentation and other efforts, I do also do analysis of fuel cell vehicle costs.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm the subject matter expert on electrification in the branch, and working on the lead staff on electrification costs for the rulemaking. So today we'll be discussing Carb staff's preliminary analysis on the incremental direct manufacturing cost to switch from a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle to one of the zero emission vehicle technologies for light duty passenger cars and trucks. The costs being discussed in this portion are derived from the standardized regulatory impact assessment for the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rulemaking. The costs are actively being refined for the forthcoming initial statement of reasons, which will be released later this year. So this analysis was completed for the draft impact assessment for the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rulemaking that covers light duty passenger car regulations for post 2025 model years. Carb staff's approach to the ZEV cost analysis involves assessing ZEV technology costs relative to a vehicle where a traditional baseline internal combustion engine, or ICE, powertrain is removed. The incremental cost is therefore determined by adding battery costs and non-battery ZEV component costs while subtracting the costs associated with a compliant ICE. When assessing ZEV technology costs that are incremental to a conventional vehicle, we start by evaluating different cost categories that make up each of the different zero emission vehicle technologies. For battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles, those categories consist of a battery cost group, a non-battery component cost group, an engine and associated emissions delete costs, and a ZEV assembly cost reduction category. There are differences in the specifics of the makeup of those categories. For instance, a fuel cell electric vehicle has fuel cell and tank costs in the non-battery component cost category and a smaller battery, while the BEVs have onboard chargers and larger batteries. The plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are more unique in that they still have battery and non-battery costs, just like the fuel cells and BEVs, but they also maintain their internal combustion engine. So they do not get a delete engine cost. They do not require additional GHG technology to meet our current ACC 1 or Advanced Clean Cars 1 regulation. So that technology cost is subtracted. And due to their complexity, they do not get to claim the ZEV assembly cost reductions. Lastly, as we move into describing some of the specific costs for these categories, it is important to note that all the costs in the beginning of this presentation are estimated to be direct manufacturing costs, or DMC, to the vehicle manufacturer, and are not the same amount that an automaker might be expected to increase the sales price, or that a consumer might be expected to pay for that vehicle. Price values will be discussed later in this presentation. So how do we take the costs and apply them to different vehicles? On the left of the slide, the pie chart shows California's fleet segmented into 5 categories of vehicles based on model year 2019 sales. Those categories include small cars, medium and large cars, small SUVs, medium and large SUVs, and pickups, where modeled ZEV packages we modeled ZEV packages that were sized for each of these vehicle classes. What do those different packages look like for each of the ZEV technologies, BEVs, PHEVs, and fuel cells? We first had to decide on an all-electric range for each technology. For BEVs, we landed on 300 miles for a base version and 400 miles for the longer range variant. Consumers appear to want more range, and OEMs are responding by increasing range year over year, with 300 miles becoming the new baseline. Manufacturers could still offer lower or higher range variants to best fit their customer needs, but for this analysis, it is assumed that a typical standard vehicle would have about 300 miles of range. Additionally, 300 miles is likely where a much broader portion of potential consumers would consider a BEV in place of a traditional gasoline vehicle. And this range offers more flexibility for those consumers that don't have reliable home or workplace charging. The longer range 400-mile packages have been modeled from 2026 to 2035, but it is expected that those longer range variants won't be sold in higher volumes until later years when battery and vehicle costs are lower. Plug-in hybrid ranges were determined using a different rationale. In order to have confidence in high levels of reduced greenhouse gas and criteria pollutant emissions, PHEVs need longer range and bigger batteries to support higher power demands of non-blended operation. In other words, keeping the engine from starting under high torque demands by the consumer until the battery has been depleted. Taking into account future estimated technical advancements, we are generating costs for a fixed 50 miles of all electric range. For fuel cells, we are relying on the range modeled for the US DOE Vehicle Technology Office's analysis, which is 320 miles. So let's dive into the first cost category of battery costs. Carb staff's estimated future battery pack costs are based on the recently released National Academies of Sciences report, which projected future battery pack costs at around $90 to $115 per kilowatt hour by 2025 and $65 to $80 per kilowatt hour by 2030. While other sources, such as Bloomberg NEF, have indicated that average battery pack costs for the transportation sector may reach around $58 per kilowatt hour by 2030, Carb staff are relying on the National Academy's report as their findings are more specific to the light duty sector. Carb staff are using the midpoint of the National Academy's ranges through 2030 and then apply a 5% year-over-year reduction from 2030 to 2035 to get the resultant pack costs shown in this graph for battery electric vehicles. For BEVs, battery costs start at $95 per kilowatt hour in 2026, which declined to about $73 in 2030 and down to $56 in 2035. PHEV battery pack costs are shown by the blue line, which are roughly 40% higher than battery electric pack costs on a $1 per kilowatt hour basis. So battery pack costs are not the only part that adds cost to a ZEV. Non-battery components include the electric motor and gearbox, or multiple of those if the vehicle has more than one motor or gearbox, and the inverters associated with those electric motors. The list also includes the DC to DC converter, high voltage cabling and control unit, the onboard charger, additional thermal management components, and the included convenience charging cord set. Staff used several sources of information to inform the development of these costs, including vehicle teardown reports for the Model 3, Bolt EV, and BMW i3. The teardown reports are considered the gold standard for understanding vehicle costs, as they provide very granular detail of the vehicle components and the cost to manufacture those components. As an example, staff's draft non-battery component cost for a 300-mile medium/large SUV BEV in current dollars are estimated to be $3,700 in 2026 and will fall to roughly $3,300 in 2035. And I'll now turn it over to Andrew Martinez to discuss other cost components specific to fuel cell electric vehicles.
Thank you, Ryan. So in addition to a battery and electric motor, fuel cell electric vehicles incorporate a fuel cell system and a hydrogen storage system. The main component of the fuel cell system is the fuel cell stack, which converts the chemical energy in hydrogen into electricity used to power the vehicle. The hydrogen storage system consists of one or more high-pressure gaseous hydrogen storage tanks, valves, safety devices, and sensors. Although the first mass-produced vehicles for individual commercial sale were launched in 2015 and 2016, fuel cell electric vehicle technology has been in development for multiple decades. United States Department of Energy has reported that the cost to build fuel cell stacks has fallen 70% since 2008. The US Department of Energy also funds research into the cost of fuel cell and hydrogen storage systems, carried out by Strategic Analysis Incorporated. These cost evaluations are updated annually for present-day state-of-the-art technology. The bottom-up design for manufacture and assembly analysis evaluates the full cost of raw materials, machine time, labor, and other processes. The methodology also allows for costs to be modeled at various rates of production. In 2020, Strategic Analysis also developed a cost model specifically for high durability fuel cell systems that achieve 8,000 hours of useful life. The chart on the left shows the cost for various fuel cell system sizes according to the strategic analysis model. This chart also shows the ranges of production volumes at the benchmark model years of 2020, 2025, 2030, and 2035 evaluated in the Advanced Clean Cars 2 analysis. The timeframes for estimated production volumes are based on Carb staff evaluation of current auto manufacturer capabilities and public announcements of future production intent. At the same time, the Argonne National Laboratory has for many years published analysis of vehicle equipment specification and cost to satisfy federal greenhouse gas and fuel economy rules while maintaining certain vehicle performance attributes. This is accomplished through the tool autonomy. Cost estimates are made in close collaboration with the strategic analysis models, but typically only for high volume production. Argonne National Lab's analysis also projects future costs, incorporating a model for component cost reductions as technology improvements are made over time. For the Advanced Clean Cars 2 standardized regulatory impact assessment, Carb staff leveraged these two data resources to generate fuel cell electric vehicle cost projections that account for varying production volumes and the potential cost improvement due to technology advancement. Revised values based on more recent information from Argonne National Lab and strategic analysis may be incorporated into future Advanced Clean Cars 2 analysis. Next slide, please, Ryan. Thanks. Example costs for the fuel cell and hydrogen storage systems combined are shown on this slide. Estimates range from approximately $9,500 for present day state-of-the-art technology to be introduced in model year 2025 vehicles at low production volumes for small cars to $11,500 for medium SUVs. Future costs in model year 2035 at high production rates and high technology advancement range from approximately $5,000 for small cars to $6,000 for medium SUVs. I'll turn it back to Ryan now.
Thanks, Andrew. So direct manufacturing costs describe what it would cost a manufacturer to make a vehicle. However, that cost needs to be adjusted to convert to the price a consumer might see. In this case, staff is using what's called a retail price equivalent, or RPE markup. RPE is intended to capture other costs not directly related to manufacturing the vehicle, like sales, warranty, R&D, etc. This graphic is similar to the second slide that was shown, except that it includes how the RPE is applied. The industry average RPE markup is 1.5, which has been used in other rulemaking efforts, and the same is being used by Carb staff for the ACC2 price estimates. To convert from DMC to RPE, simply multiply the direct manufacturing incremental cost by the RPE markup factor of 1.5. Please note that DMC and RPE costs do not include any operational costs for the vehicle, like fuel or maintenance. That would be used for a total cost of operation, or TCO, analysis. This table shows the itemized incremental DMC and RPE costs for a 2026 model year medium and large SUV category vehicle. Included in the table are the battery costs, non-battery costs, fuel cell stack and tank costs for fuel cells, delete costs, and ZEV assembly reductions. We discussed battery, non-battery, and fuel cell specific costs in the previous slides. If we remember back to slide 3, which covered the cost categories, there was a category for engine removal and emission system delete costs. For the BEVs and fuel cell electric vehicles, that category is meant to be inclusive of all things that are removed from a conventional ICE vehicle, which are not required, like the internal combustion engine, transmission, fuel system, emission controls, etc. Another aspect of those delete costs that are shared between BEVs, fuel cells, and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are the technologies associated with making conventional ICEs more efficient to meet the GHG rule in place to the 2025 model year. One last thing to note is that there are different delete engine costs between the BEV 300 and the BEV 400 and the fuel cell packages. Staff assumed that the cheaper sedan-based transmissions were converted to BEV 300s, while the more expensive truck-based system is converted to BEV 400 and fuel cell electric vehicle platforms. Now that we've described some of the cost inputs and range assumptions we are using, I will now walk through what the output incremental prices look like for the example vehicle category of a medium and large SUV. These are average incremental prices to switch from a base ICE to one of the aforementioned ZEV technologies in the identified model year. On the y-axis is the incremental price for each technology, and those are separated into model years on the x-axis. Evident in the chart is that the incremental prices for these various technologies on this class of vehicles still reflect an increase over conventional gasoline vehicles for all model years between 2026 and 2035. Fuel cell technology becomes cost competitive with longer range BEVs in 2033, and both the longer range BEV and fuel cell vehicle have lower incremental prices than the plug-in hybrid equivalent. These costs or prices are not a determinant of a specific price increase to a consumer for a new car, and they do not incorporate any operating costs or fuel or savings from fuel, electricity, or maintenance. However, we will be including all those aspects in our final rulemaking proposal as part of the overall costs and benefits to society and consumers. So this is the same type of chart as the previous slide, except that now shows the small car category. The trends are similar to the medium and large SUV category, except that the BEV 300 technology package reaches cost parity with a conventional EV in 2035. Fuel cell vehicles are also cheaper than BEV 400s starting in 2028 and cheaper than plug-in hybrids starting in 2031. So as I wrap up today, I want to reiterate that these costs and prices are actively being refined, and it is anticipated that costs will be lower in our updated analysis for our staff report that is forthcoming. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you. We appreciate your time, and we're here to take any questions. And oh, and on this slide below, I think it'll be posted. Those are linkable or hyperlinked hyperlinked things to our specific parts of our rulemaking effort.
Thanks, Ryan. We do have a raised hand from Walter. Your line is unmuted.
Thank you. Well, I've been reading a lot about the cost of recycling lithium ion batteries, and that it's a huge problem. It's sort of the equivalent of the fuel rods in a nuclear reactor. And I'm wondering, since we're interested in the overall costs and benefits to society, if your chart shouldn't be expanded to include the problem of recycling, and it obviously goes up with longer range vehicles. If that cost shouldn't be factored in some column somewhere along the line. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Walter. I appreciate the comment there and the question. Yeah, I mean, we are thinking about that, right? We're looking at the recycling efforts throughout the industry. I know that there have been several announcements made by OEMs to co-locate recycling facilities or announce recycling companies that they're working with to deal with their probably manufacturing scrap and used batteries and warranty replacement issues that they have. With that said, as we see some of the price increases for the materials that go into those batteries, it makes recycling more and more valuable. And there is I'm not sure if you're aware, and maybe I can get this information to you if you're not, there's a very strong effort on behalf of the state to try to look at this issue. And I think there's a report forthcoming in the next couple of months. There's an advisory board that's meeting that is going to recommend actions to the legislature to help solve the recycling issue, or at least attempt to address some of the problems like you mentioned.
Good. Love to see it. Appreciate that. And again, at scale, this is going to be a huge, huge problem.
We don't have any further questions at this moment.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Andrew and Ryan, for that presentation. It was great information. I'm now going to pass it off to Brian Fauble with the California Energy Commission, who's going to provide us an update on ZEV infrastructure in the state. Brian?
Thank you. Let's load up the deck. All right. Everyone can see my title slider all right?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Brian Fauble. I am an Energy Commission specialist in the Commission's light duty EV infrastructure deployment unit. And as mentioned today, I'll be presenting on California's goals for EV charging infrastructure. First, I wanted to talk about the Energy Commission's clean transportation goals overall, and how we have a goal of investing at least 50% of its funding for sites located in disadvantaged and low-income communities. Along with helping reach the state's infrastructure goals, we need to make sure that all residents have access to charging and refueling infrastructure. This includes funding projects that address some of the challenges that disproportionately affect low-income residents and disadvantaged communities. For example, we currently have open grant funding opportunities for charging to address multifamily housing residents and rural residents charging needs. We are also co-funding the community-led Clean Mobility Options Project with the Air Resources Board. So SB 1000 was enacted in 2018 with the legislative intent of increasing access to EV charging infrastructure in all of California communities. It requires the CEC to assess distribution of and available access to EV chargers by geographical area, population density, and income level grouped as low, middle, and high income. These assessments are updated annually and show general areas where where there are public charging gaps across underserved communities. They help inform our equity investments in light duty EV charging infrastructure through grants and rebate programs. This analysis was started in 2020, focusing on assessing the distribution of the chargers across geographical areas and communities. And we looked at the differences in the total number of chargers per capita, chargers, and density of chargers averaged across air districts, counties, and census tracts. About half of low-income communities average drive times of 5 minutes or less. About a third have average drive times between 5 and 10 minutes, and about 16% of low-income communities have drive times of 10 minutes or more, and this is to DC fast chargers as shown in the map to the right. Low-income communities with average drive times of under 10 minutes have a high degree of urban areas, as you can see in the blue. Though maybe surprisingly, about 1/3 of the low-income communities in the orange with long drive times have high degrees in rural areas. So getting into the state's goals, the state has a goal for electric vehicle charging infrastructure of 250,000 chargers by 2025, which includes at least 10,000 direct current fast chargers. The slide on the right is the Energy Commission's zero emission vehicle dashboard. Currently shows having just over 79,000 chargers. That includes 7,100 DC fast chargers and 71,000 level 2 chargers. With the current expected investments from the Energy Commission, various utility programs, and other announced funding programs, we anticipate almost reaching the 10,000 DC fast charger goal by 2025, but coming up short on the overall 250,000 charger goal. The state's one-time funding from the 2021-2022 budget provides additional investment to help close this gap. To address closing the gap on the state's EV charging infrastructure goals, the CEC provides funding through a variety of mechanisms. One of the main mechanisms is the California Electric Vehicles Infrastructure Project, or Cali VIP. Cali VIP is an online incentive project that releases regional projects and allows businesses to apply and manage their projects online. Through 2021, Cali VIP has launched 12 projects covering 36 counties and providing funding over $206 million in incentive funds, which this includes over $41 million from local project partners. Cali VIP's next project, the Southern California Level 2 project, returns to Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties, this time making $23 million available for Level 2 charger installations. More information on this project is available on the calivip.org website as well. There's also still funding for level 2 projects, level 2 in multiple counties across the various projects. I encourage everyone to visit the page as well to see which counties still have funding available. After Cali VIP, we are also funding 2 new block grants that were approved at the CEC's December business meeting. CalSTART and the Center for Sustainable Energy will work with the CEC to design and develop the new block grants, which will be designed to complement one another rather than compete. These feature project concepts, eligibility requirements, and full design elements will be developed with public input in the coming months. This slide just quickly shows 2 Energy Commission grant funding opportunities that are currently open on the street now. The first, nicknamed REACH, is seeking applications to demonstrate a business or charging model to best serve multifamily housing residents. The solicitation is open and applications are due in, I think, 8 days on the 18th. So you still have a chance if you want to throw something together. The second, nicknamed REV charging, is seeking applications to demonstrate replicable and scalable models for rural charging. The solicitation is still accepting applications through March 11th. You can click on the slides, the links on the slide here, or visit the Energy Commission's website for more information on either of the 2 funding opportunities. In December 2021, we also held a workshop presenting multiple project concepts that we're considering for future funding opportunities. The potential concepts listed here could be offered via grant funding solicitation or through a block grant incentive project. As concepts are finalized for funding, we will hold workshops to help design the specific elements for each concept and funding opportunity. This last slide discusses California's 2025 goals for hydrogen refueling stations. The state's hydrogen goal is to have 200 refueling stations by 2025. The Energy Commission's AB8 Joint Staff Report, which was updated in December last year, expects to see 100 refueling stations operational by the end of 2023 and 177 stations operational by 2026. The 177 by 2026 does not include as well the stations that will be funded through the one-time funding allocation from the 2021-2022 California budget, which was included to help close the gap to 200 refueling stations. And the map on the right is from the AB8 report as well, showing the location and proximity of the chargers to disadvantaged communities. With that, I'm available for questions.
Thanks, Brian, but we have no questions at this time. Oh, just, okay, Walter was raised his hand 1 microsecond first. Walter, your line is unmuted.
Thanks again. Disadvantaged communities, I think, predominantly live in multiple family dwellings. And multiple family dwellings, well, any house is, of course, a great place to refuel because of the long dwell times. And just as to volunteer some information, southbaycities.org, we did a study several years ago with the Luskin Center for Innovation, in which we did actually went on site and looked at different multifamily dwellings and what their situation was. And the conclusion at the top level was that if you're putting in 110, you can pretty much do it in a multifamily dwelling. And this is a fairly affluent area, so it's not, it's got to be worse in disadvantaged communities. But if you're going to put in 220, you're most likely going to have to upgrade the entire panel. And so the cost of that becomes huge. There's also, with larger buildings, a real problem of who gets the parking spots that are next to the charging. I mean, there's like a design problem in the parking area. We also have a typology of parking structures, which I've never seen anything like it. I just thought Luskin did great work. So there's pedestal parking, is underground. There's all, I mean, it's really complicated. And I'm just wondering if the CEC doesn't want to take that up, the actual, how does it hit the ground in multifamily dwellings with both parking and panel upgrades?
Yeah, we've definitely been battling or trying to crack the nut for multifamily housing charging for a while now. And that one solicitation that is available on the streets right now is kind of asking for a wide range of possible projects. And that's what we're trying to seek, is applicants to come in and present multiple different demonstrations. We're not just looking for the general, hey, we're installing chargers, but what is the best technology use case? Is it on site? Is it curbside out front? Is it fast charger depots in proximity of a bunch of apartments or condos? And so we're trying to seek multiple kind of demonstrations for this. And as well, your topic about the family homes as well, the governor's current proposed budget, I believe for 2022, is also, presenting some money for at-home charging. And so we are exploring different options for doing single families, but for the multifamily as well, we are looking for the wide range of different charging options, whether it's level 1s, just blanketing the parking lot. Is it level 2s? Is it fast chargers nearby? But we're still kind of trying to fund the different options to see what's the best use case.
Complicated situation for sure. But if you're of a mind, you might take a look at the Luskin study on our website. It's got some really good information on it.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to unmute Lonnie Mason.
Yes, good afternoon. Enjoy the presentation there. Based on the percentage for the low disadvantaged community, how did you guys come about that percentage? Is it due to the charging station already located in those communities?
Percentage of the 50% investment, is that what you're referencing?
Well, you were saying you said 16%.
Oh,
and
the hydrogen.
Yeah.
Let me go back to that. So the hydrogen gap, again, the percentage overall is the population of all of California. And so, a lot of the main population is going to be in the urban group centers. So it was referencing that you might see more orange, but the population in that orange is, just a smaller share than the overall state population. But it's still a goal of us that we do want to, lower that percentage and get everyone a lot closer. That orange says it's 10 minutes plus, some of it up to 190 minutes. That's just not acceptable. We need to make this a lot more equitable and accessible. And how can we address that?
Yes, yes, that is an issue there. And also in regards to the multifamily housing, I already know the key and the answer to that. Basically, we cannot use, if it's going to be inside, when I'm looking at disadvantaged communities, if it's going to be inside the apartment structure, inside, down in the parking garage, we can probably have longer charging stations. But outside, I wouldn't advise that. And that's where we will probably have to spend more of the money when it comes to the faster charging stations, because some areas just not cool to be sitting out there for 2 to 3 hours waiting for your car to totally recharge. And it depends on how many stations that are actually put out there too as well. But I kind of already know the answer to that in regards to my community and what needs to be done in my community and other communities that I'm aware of. But thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely the big difficulty with multifamily is no one complex is the same. The area has high-rise parking garages, while others might be over a couple of acres and spread out. So, it's going to be what's the best use case for each site.
Oh yeah, and as far as my community, I know the buildings. I know my community like the back of my hand. So I'm aware of the parking structure, and the majority of the multifamily units. And then unfortunately, you have housing too, that's been separated. And so it's a house, but it may be 3 units, within that home as well. So like you said, there's additional funding coming for that. You said down the pipeline, right?
Yeah, I think it was in the governor's proposed budget, so they'll still have to go through the legislature and see what the May revise looks like.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, we actually have one question over that's written by Gia Vaccine. Can you revisit the number of open hydrogen refueling stations? I'd like to understand how the numbers on the slide compare to the numbers on the CEC dashboard for hydrogen refueling stations.
Sure. Yeah, so let's see. I'll reshare my screen real quick. So operational is we have at 61, and that is combining the I believe the light duty and the medium duty, with 36 planned as well. And so, yeah, this was pulled from the dashboard, but again, combining the two, light duty and medium duty.
Thanks, Brian. That's all the questions we have right now.
Great.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that presentation. I think we're going to move on to our last presentation of this section, and I'd like to invite Dr. Gil Tull, who will be presenting on the COVID-19 impacts on the market. Gil?
Thank you. Let's see, I think that's okay. Can you see the right slide? Hey.
We can see your slides, but also your speaking notes as well.
Yeah, okay, so I need to flip that. Better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So as the last speaker, and we are a little bit behind, I will be brief. Also because almost everything we talked about and the previous speakers were talking about were already including COVID-19 impacts, its impact everything in our life. And, you know, when we talk about travel demand impacts in the last 2 years, employment change and the need to commute changed dramatically. And these things are already starting to change back very, very fast. And how much of it will actually stay is open to debate. And I don't think that any of the researchers have better handle on how much will stick and how much will go back to previous behavior. What does stay different is land use changes. All of these guys who move to a Tao, for example, will stay in Tao for longer. They're not going to run back to buy or rent a house in the Bay Area. We know that transit is bouncing back, but we have some changes. And TNC, Uber and Lyft, how much of that will go back to what it was before COVID? How much the price change will change the impact? And of course, we have secondary impacts of higher gas prices and higher demand for privately owned vehicles. That will be the focus of my talk today. We have to remember that when COVID happened, many other things happened. When COVID happened, these huge fires in California happened. When COVID happened, the awareness of climate change changed dramatically. And that it's not COVID, but it does happen in the last 2 years. We had a political change, COVID or not. And I will talk more on the global EV market change, on the new EV models and shift of vehicle demand in general. As people said before, the EV market, the global EV market doubled in 1 year, from 3 million cars in 2020 to 6 million cars in 2021. Most of them full electric cars, most of them light duty vehicles, and some big shift from cars to crossovers, SUV, light duty trucks, a little bit bigger than what we had before. The plug-in hybrid market also growing, not as fast as the regular car market, but also is growing. And this is global market. And 6 million vehicles in 2021, we are still tallying up the total sales, but it's between 65 to 70 million. So the global market is about 8% Depends who do you ask. I think it's probably will end up about 7%, but some people say 10 right now. But let's go back to the US, and we talked about it on the first presentation, and I want to go and talk about it again. This is 2021 numbers. It's not including, it's the last 9 months of the year. We have so many models in California. You can buy electric vehicle or you can see on an ad an electric vehicle in every size and flavor and color. But these are models, they're not selling any. You see, they are selling thousands of cars. We have about 40 models that sell nothing, and we have about 5 models that sell cars. The only OEMs that actually sell electric cars are Tesla, Nissan, GM, and Toyota. That's it. Ford is getting into it now with the Mach-E and so on, but they're in this long tail up down there. It's changing. Is it changing fast? Is it changing now? Is it changing in the next 12 months? So it will take a couple of years. We'll talk about it a little bit more in the next couple of slides. When we count model, we count this huge list to the right. The list keeps growing. We need to start not just counting models, but saying something like how many models sells more than 50,000 cars? How many models sell more than 100,000 cars? How many OEM sell what % of their production as electric? Now let's look at what happened during COVID 2020, 2021 in California, in the US, and some other countries. So on the left side, we have the market share in selected countries. And you can see that the market share in US stays very slow growth from 0 to 3% in the last 10 years. That's the yellow. The green is California. Slow growth from 2% in 2013 to 12% today. In Norway, we're almost at 80, 90% now for plug-in vehicles, including a lot of plug-in hybrids. In Germany, it was more or less like the US all the way to 2019, then it jumped to 20-something% in the last 2 years. And in China, we also have this slow growth, but a very big jump in the last 2 years. If we look on the right side, that's year over year. So yes, in California, we are at 12%, but if we look at year over year growth, nothing much happened. Nothing also much happened in the US. The places that had a big change are Europe, and I put Germany here as an example, and China. These are the places that now have CO2 regulation that push the market. We don't have a new ZEV mandate yet. It will take us a little bit of time, 2026 or ACC2. We don't have anything to push the market the same way that it's happened in Europe these days. So what does it mean for our car market? If I will go back here, no, actually we'll go here. This is California 2013 to 2021. I'm coming to this slide, that's the money slide. That's probably will be the last one or one more before we're going for a short break. What you can see is California was recovering from the previous economy crisis. And by 2015, we got to our 20 million cars a year market share. This is a healthy market with a little bit of pent-up demand effect. Try more than 19 million a year, 1.9, sorry, about 2 million cars a year. That's a healthy market. And we were on this market all the way to 2019. And then 2020, 2021, supply chain. That's the real impact of COVID. Supply chain issues and the market crushed. The market dropped dramatically. Electric cars, the green, full electric, the yellow, plug-in hybrid. And if you have, it's not the blue actually, it's red. If you have very strong eyes, you can find the red in 2019. These are actually fuel cells. Sorry for the confusion here. They actually did not drop much. They kept the same size, even grow a little bit. And this is how the market share of electric car in California is growing. It's growing because the total number of sales is dropping. Why the market share of plug-in is growing? Not because of regulation, not because of revenue for the OEMs, immediate one, because of the side effect of the global changes. OEMs make more cars in expectation for new regulation that will come. The OEMs are making cars on the platform that they can make more money on, the platform with the high-end revenue. They're not making cars, actually. They're making crossovers, SUVs, and larger vehicles. And they're making vehicles that they can make more money on. It's not always 1.5 as we are doing with the TCO. When the OEMs are selling plug-in hybrid or when Tesla sells car, their revenue is higher, and that's where they're focusing on. And we are not expecting them to start selling low-end electric cars in the next year, not even in the next 2 years. When the market will bounce back to 2 million cars a year, the US market will bounce back. Only then, only later, we are expecting to see lower end electric cars and fuel cell cars. It's going to take 2 or 3 years before we will see a supply that will meet the lower income demand, will meet the average income demand. Now, what else do we see when we looked at the market and how it's changed in the last 2 years with COVID, with all the changes in behavior? We see that, as we said, EVs demand, unlike the total car demand, did not drop. It actually stays pretty stable. Teslas, the Mach-E's, these nice cars are creating pretty good demand. We see an immediate growth of the second-time buyers and of two PV household. If you look at the right side here, 2 PV household is the orange group on the way to 100% market share. This group will buy more electric car than MUDs in the next 10 years. Households who buying their second electric car will buy more electric cars than households who buy their first one and live in an MUD. It's not about equity. It's not about anything else. It's about how many new car buyers and how many new cars are being purchased at MUDs and how many new cars are being purchased at detached houses and people who can buy a second new car and moving to second electric car. That's just the new car market. Now, when we talk about these guys, most of them can charge their car at home, but we need to think about much bigger impact on charging infrastructure in the next couple of years. And there are plenty more points on my notes, but I think I will stop here because we are already behind schedule. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
We have one raised hand from Plet. Plet, I've unmuted your line.
Hi, it's Pierre Can with the Ecology Action. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Miguel, great presentation. I really appreciate it. I was wondering, that last slide that you showed, where do you get that data in terms of forecasting? You know, the big chunk of the EV new market is going to be, you know, people getting their second EVs per household.
Okay, great question. So in 2020, we did a survey of people who purchased purchased an EV in 2020 and 2019. And I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but about 20% of them were already second-time buyers, and about 10 to 15% were buying an additional EV to their household, not just replacing. I think more than 20% were second-time buyers, and so that's one data point. The other data point is we look at the vehicle car buyer survey, the 2019 survey that the CEC did for the entire state. That's for regular car, not for electric car. And we looked at the number of car buyers and how many cars people own who live in MUDs and how many cars people who live in detached houses own, and how many new cars were purchased in the last couple of years. And based on these two data points, that's my estimation. So if we just look at new car buyers, the number of new car purchase in a 2 or 3 car household is much higher than the first time in MUDs.
Great, thank you very much.
And it looks like we have no further questions at this time.
I think I know we're a little behind on schedule, but I think we can make it up later on. So we're still going to take our full 10-minute break right now, just to give folks a chance to stretch, refill water, and things like that. And so yes, so we'll see you back here at 2:35. Thank you. Let's get started into our second half of this workshop. And so now that we're back from break, we're going to dive right into the next portion where we're going to discuss updates and trends in our vehicle purchase incentive programs. We'll start off with hearing about Cbrp. Before I turn it over to our program administrator, CSE, I just wanted to provide a quick update on Cbrp statistics. We have invested over $1 billion since 2010, which has funded over 448,000 rebates across California. Of these totals, nearly 30%, or about $307 million, has funded over 115,000 rebates benefiting priority populations. Last year, Cbrp received an allocation of $515 million with the intent to fund the program through fiscal year 2023-24. A plan of phased-in changes was approved by the board last November, and the first set of changes will take effect this month on February 24th. Those changes include a decrease in the income cap for standard rebate eligibility and a decrease in the MSRP cap to $45,000 for smaller vehicle classes. Additional information on these changes can be found on the Cbrp website. Now, while the board has approved the second set of changes planned for next year, staff will spend time over the next few months to meet with stakeholders and analyze whether those changes are needed to keep the program open through fiscal year 23-24, and if any changes need to be made to that plan. Public working groups will be held this spring, so please make sure you are subscribed to our listserv so you are notified of upcoming meetings. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brett Williams with the Center for Sustainable Energy. We'll go over some work they've done to analyze GHG reductions and the cost effectiveness of Cbrp using program data.
Good afternoon. Let me share my show. And just get a thumbs up, sound check, and slide visible. Go from Bianca. No, who's available to confirm that?
It's me. It's up,
Okay,
Brett, and we can hear you.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. Let me start off right off the bat by thanking my co-author on this presentation, as well as the lead author on the related greenhouse gas papers, Nick Palinetti, as well as the other analysts back at the Center for Sustainable Energy, or CSE, who helped on this work and made this presentation possible. So my name is Brett Williams, and I'm the principal advisor for electric vehicle programs at CSE. And that means I spend most of my time helping states wrangle and make a meaning from data produced by statewide electric vehicle rebate programs. Those are in order from oldest to newest, left to right in California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, Oregon, and New Jersey. Now, you're not really meant to digest this slide fully, just get a sense of the flavors of different program design that come out of each different context that a state experiences, its constraints, opportunities, goals, et cetera. And all of this is available in a very detailed handout. I've been kind of given a special lengthy slot here, and I really appreciate your attention through this. So my approach is going to be to give that impressionistic painting view of the work that's been done, especially in these first three sections. I'm going to try to move through them quickly, but at the same time, I don't want to skip them because I think they are very important, because one of the themes of the talk is that context is critical. And program-specific context is what distinguishes strategic program evaluation from a more generalized process of research for discovery. So let's jump right into quite a bit of a forced journey, if you will, that you'll take with me through understanding how we get to our destination. Now, even Shakespeare tells you the end of Romeo and Juliet in the first paragraph of the play. So I do want to give you a little bit of that bottom line upfront teaser, just to give you a sense of where we're going as I throw all of the methodological details at you. So the prologue of this presentation is that in calendar year 2019, 63,000 vehicles were rebated for being either purchased or leased, and we estimate those vehicles produce a greenhouse gas savings that averages about 3.5 tons. What we're measuring here is tons of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases on a fuel cycle basis. So well-to-wheel life cycle basis for the fuel. You add those savings up over the warranty life of the vehicle and you get 30 tons. And if you add up all the vehicles in the program, but only count those reductions that we think were most highly influenced by the rebate, we think that the program has a solid ground to claim credit for producing roughly 1 million tons of GHG savings, emissions reduced, emissions avoided savings. I'll use those interchangeably. So just to give a sense of scale, 1 million tons is similar to swapping out, 39 million light bulbs from incandescent to LEDs in the US, or letting 17 million trees grow for 10 years and sequester the equivalent amount of carbon. So one program year of this program is pretty significant. And that was done at what we estimate to be about $150 per rebate essential warranty life ton reduced. So that's where we're headed, but you should by now already be asking questions. How did we get there? How do we figure? What does it rebate essential mean precisely? Tell me more about warranty life. And that is the half hour's traffic of our stage. So hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll have a better sense of the plot and everything will make perfect sense. Fingers crossed, let's give it a try. Context. The first thing I should say is that this study was conducted by CSC to inform Cbrp. It does not necessarily represent the views of Carb staff or any final project reporting determinations, but we're very happy to contribute to the conversation in this way in this kind of lengthy slot today. So how are we contributing to the conversation? The presentation builds on and actually takes a little bit farther two recent research papers. One was done for the International Energy Program Evaluation Conference. The other was published in the journal Energies. And both of those have as their origin story the Carb funding plan approach. Now, the Carb funding plan approach is a multi-program, forward-thinking document. It uses devices that are appropriate to that, like vehicle averages that cover the broad portfolio of its transportation incentives. And it's intentionally expressed as, a conservative starting point subject to data availability. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do, is inform the conversation with program generated and case specific data. The Energies article was a kind of life of project perspective that went through about mid 2018. The more recent IEPEC paper flips to an annual update. So looking at the most recent year of available data, in this case, I'm going to focus on 2019 because some of the inputs for 2020 still aren't finalized. For example, the low carbon fuel standard electricity value is in draft form. And so our calculations are necessarily draft as well. It takes time for the data to settle. But the 2019 understanding will kind of give us that solid foundation pre-COVID, topsy-turvy environments that we've heard about all day. What are the basic dynamics underlying the greenhouse gas savings from the program? And I will there are 15 slides on 2020 results in the appendix that you have available to download right now. And so I'll make a little bit of a teaser right at the end to those after we've established this kind of common foundation of understanding. Okay, so program design affects program outcomes. If I take you back to 2019, you can see and digest this again at your leisure. If I summarize it quickly, fuel cell, battery, and plug-in hybrid EVs received larger, medium, and smaller rebates respectively. Those rebates were reduced by $500 towards the end of 2019. But for low-income consumers who qualified for the increased rebate, the rebate was kept constant through a $500 increase. The minimum electric range that was required to be eligible for the program went up a little bit, and effectively, to oversimplify, that carved out a lot of high-performance, luxury-tuned plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And importantly, the MSRP cap was instituted. And I spoke this past summer about how that very likely does have benefits for program cost effectiveness, but it also raises that conversation, that balancing act that policymakers and decision makers are faced, which is maximizing cost effectiveness on the one hand and optimizing market acceleration or total progression towards 100% goals on the other. And that theme will come up again today, but not in the context of high priced cars, in the context of lower income consumers receiving larger rebates. The other thing that's notable, and it's highlighted in red here, and I've actually taken a snapshot of one of the briefs we have online on the Cbrp website to sort of highlight. 2019 was one of those years when Cbrp experienced a waitlist. It was a 110-day waitlist. Now, notably, the waitlist did not affect the increased rebate for low-income consumers. That was held constant. Funds were reserved to keep that going. But undeniably, this had some kind of unknown impacts on the program. This is kind of a challenge to the research community. What are the impacts of waitlists on the program? The good news is the most recent approach taken to the program was a multi-year perspective, like it's taken in New York and other places, to minimize those disruptions. But we should acknowledge that that happened in 2019 when we're thinking about the analysis. When you put those program design, shape, forming features on top of market dynamics, this is kind of what you get in terms of the shape of the program. So what the window we're looking at here is kind of on the backside of that mountain of the disruptive release of the Model 3 starting in mid-2018. And again, the challenge to the researchers is what would have been the slope of the backside of that mountain had the waitlist not happened, or had something else happened, had we had huge rebates for all sorts of consumers. That's always the sort of open question, but that backside slope obviously had a lot to do with supply and sales of the Model 3 and Model Y, and was nothing compared to the cliff that, of course, all economic activity fell off of for COVID, and we've heard a lot about that today. Okay, so that's the context. Now let's skip to what actually happened in 2019 in terms of rebates. 63,000 vehicles, about a quarter of them were plug-in hybrids, over a quarter. The plug-in hybrids received less than a fifth of the funding because they get those small rebates. Of course, most of the program was battery electrics. And then we've got the other features there. Okay, so you get a sense of that. If we extend it to include that little glimpse of 2020 that is in the appendix, all told, we're talking about data gathered from 100,000 rebate applications and 11,000 survey responses, which we have statistically weighted to represent the population as a whole, better represent the population as a whole on various dimensions, and the details are available in the slides. We also bring to bear the monthly California new vehicle registration data to produce a California sales weighted baseline fuel economy. So what is a baseline fuel economy? Well, that gets us into the methodology, the fancy research term for the recipe used to do these estimations. So what is a baseline vehicle? A baseline vehicle is the vehicle that the Carb funding plan assumes would have been bought and driven had not the rebated electric vehicle been bought or leased and driven. I always mean bought or leased when I say bought. So you take the emissions generated by the vehicle that might have been, and you subtract away the emissions from the vehicle that did happen, and you get the savings or reductions. And the key, one of the keys here is that little lowercase I. And what we're trying to do is tailor these characterizations to each and every rebate, right? No vehicle averages. Let's use the Cbrp data and try to make them as tailored as possible and advance that methodology over time. So I'm going to show a little math here that the researchers will enjoy. Others of you, I've tried to highlight the color-coded concepts that are important to understand. Baseline vehicle minus rebated vehicle. The baseline vehicle, how do you calculate it? We're talking about a fuel cycle, well-to-wheels emissions calculation. It's basically just how the carbon intensity of the fuel, how many grams of CO2 get emitted per gallon of gasoline used, how intensely the vehicle uses that fuel, so gallons per mile, and then how long how many miles you're allowing the vehicle to add up and count the benefits from. You switch it over to electric vehicles and we have even more information to tailor the assumptions. So in the case of the baseline vehicle, we're tailoring each of those assumptions to at least the year. In the case of the rebate, we've got even more specific data. You swap in electric vehicle characterizations, you swap in a little bit more tailoring, and then plug-in hybrids make the next one look even more complicated because they use both gasoline and electricity. So that introduces the next color-coded concept, which is the percent of electric miles, colored purple, John Anderson's favorite. And so that allows us to basically assign the miles per year that were driven electrically versus on gasoline for plug-in hybrids. You add all these up over what's called an operational time frame. So for the purposes of this talk, we're using the warranty life of the vehicle. If the vehicle doesn't go as long as the warranty, the OEM pays out of pocket, and not too many vehicles are going to be doing that for too long before there's some adjustments made. There is, of course, these are greenhouse gases, so it doesn't matter where they're emitted, but there is, of course, the possibility that a car could leave the state and start charging on a less efficient grid. We're going to treat that explicitly as a separate factor. We'll call that out-of-state leakage. And perhaps Dr. Tall or Dr. Rapson, the last time I heard about out-of-state leakage, my understanding was that it was relatively modest. Maybe that's another challenge for the research community to sort of update our thinking on that. But we're using warranty life because it better represents and more clearly represents, without obscuring the dynamics of the performance of different vehicle types over their potential lifetime. And of course, many vehicles last much longer than their warranty. So we'll use those dynamics, and then we'll think about out-of-state leakage as an adjustment at the end. Okay, details are in the slides and in the papers. Let's move on from the recipe to the ingredients. So I'll give you just, again, an impressionist sense of these ingredients. We calculate our own California-specific sales-weighted average fuel economy for the baseline vehicle. We use the low carbon fuel standard for the carbon intensity of fuels. We deal with the VMT assumption by doing warranty life. We'll get to that in a minute. And then we get the percent electric driving for plug-in hybrids by looking at the literature, seeing what the research literature says about specific models of plug-in hybrid vehicles, and then fit a curve through that information. So if we don't know something specific about your plug-in hybrid, we can say, okay, it has this amount of electric range. This means it's probably this percent of electric driving throughout the year. These are our best guesses down the middle. Good researchers also vary those guesses to between low and high bounds to sort of see the impact that that has on the results. And the most important impact, it's not that we don't think our best guess isn't a good place to start, it's just there's a lot of potential what they call counterfactual behaviors. Would that consumer necessarily have bought a new gasoline vehicle of the same model year as their electric vehicle, which is the primary assumption, had they not bought the electric vehicle? Or might they have kept their old, more polluting vehicle? Might they have bought a used electric vehicle? Might they have done some other behavior? And so that's the challenge to the research community, to not improve the best guess so much as understand the distribution of possibilities, and maybe we can narrow the uncertainty on that assumption. So that's an important one to keep in mind. A lot about that counterfactual behavior, what would have been. Okay, so this finally gets us to being able to talk about the results and discussion. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the emissions saved by all rebated vehicles. We'll call these rebated reductions, and we'll talk about rebate influence next. And so if you express those reductions in terms of dollars per ton saved, you want these columns to be small. You can see that plug-in hybrids come out pretty well in this calculus. So this is all vehicles that received a rebate, whether or not they needed it. Plug-in hybrids do well for a couple of reasons. Number one, their warranty life is longer. That's according to ZEV regulations. And I know the future ZEV regulations are proposing more of an even playing field in terms of the warranty being 100,000 miles. That was not the case in 2019, but even if it were the case in this calculation, that PHEV number would jump up by about 50%, but it would still come out ahead. And the primary reason for that is a function of the fact that it gets a smaller rebate. Now, the question is, okay, with that smaller rebate, who's in and out of the program, who's in and out of the market? And that brings us over to the right column, which I'll talk about in a second. Of course, the fuel cell vehicle kind of gets stuck between the rock and the hard place because it's a less mature technology. It produces lower greenhouse gas savings potential per vehicle than even plug-in hybrids, which in turn produce lower savings potential than battery electric vehicles. And it receives a large rebate. So it's early state of commercialization. You would expect it to have less competitive cost effectiveness metric, and that's how it plays out in this calculation. The battery electric vehicles are the ones that are the dominant piece of the program, and so they sort of drive the number at the far left, which is the program average. But if we do go over to that right side and we look at the increased rebate for income qualified folks, it is higher. Now, it's not because the vehicle mix is performing any worse. Actually, this year, it's not always the case, it's not guaranteed, but the vehicle mix rebated by increased rebates is performing roughly equivalently to the vehicle mix rebated by standard rebates. So primarily the difference, what you're seeing here is just the fact that the rebate was larger. But of course, that's the point. The rebate is intentionally larger so that it brings in that new swath of consumers that wouldn't otherwise be in the program and possibly not in the market at all. So that's kind of the cautionary tale about cost effectiveness. We'll talk about that a little bit too. So now let's bring in rebate influence, because that's very important when it comes to those increased rebates. When we talk about rebate influence, we tend to think of two metrics. The first is what we call rebate importance. So over 90% of program participants rate the rebate important, not just in general, but specifically in the context of making it possible for them to acquire their vehicle, moderately, very, or extremely important, right? The top 2%, free riders, not at all important. The next 7%, we can treat them as free riders. We're not including those in this. Moderately, it's a bit more complicated. So the rebate undeniably played an important role in enabling the purchase, but it's complicated. It could also be the federal tax credit, local incentives, that sort of thing. And so that's why we tend to use this metric more for illustration and framing. And we use it across 4 states, and it's been very useful. But if you want to sort of give a program credit for emissions on a very solid conservative basis, you need to turn to a more counterfactual metric. So something that's a more direct measure, less subject to bias, and so forth. And so our second metric that we like to use is called rebate essential participants. So these are the folks who claim they simply would not have purchased their vehicle or leased their vehicle, their electric vehicle, without the Cbrp rebate specifically. Now, this isn't the first time we've used this metric out the gate. We've used it for conferences and journal articles and reports for New York and so forth. And so there's some background on the use of this metric. But we're going to take that metric and we're going to convert it into GHG savings. So the previous 55% was the number of people. Now we're looking at the percent of the total GHG savings that came from all rebated vehicles that can be attributed to those folks who are most highly influenced by the rebate. And you can see that far right column, this is where the increased rebate kind of makes up ground lost by getting more money. Well, you get to count more of the emissions saved by those cars because those emissions were highly influenced by the state rebate specifically. And if you put the two factors together, yes, the increased rebate still comes out a little bit worse on a cost effectiveness basis for saving GHGs. But notice that the left column, which is when you get to count all emissions associated with all rebated vehicles, for the increased rebate, that column on the left is pretty similar in size to the column on right, that dark solid column, which is only counting those emissions that were most highly influenced by the rebate. So I'm going to take this, put it all together to kind of wrap up this portion of the talk. The left column gets to count the most emissions. The most emissions drives the cost per ton saved down. You want the column to be low on these slides. The more emissions you count, the better. Well, you get to count all of the emissions because we're just saying, okay, this is not cause and effect. These are emissions that simply came from the vehicles that happen to get a rebate. The middle column says, well, let's kick out the free riders at least and get a better sense of the cost effectiveness of the rebate when only counting those emissions that were rebate important. And the third and final column in each group shows you the most solid ground, literally and figuratively on the slide, upon which the program can sort of claim credit for saying, okay, we caused these emissions to happen. They might not otherwise have happened without the rebate. And so that gives you a sense across technology type and rebate type, and then informs, it's the most solid basis for informing strategic decision-making. So with that in hand, let's do a little bit examination of some of the trends over time. So I mentioned that we did one life of program examination that went through 2018 and one more recent examination. Well, what happened? In short, plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles fared a little bit better over time, and range extended battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles fared a little bit worse. Why did they fare worse? In this case, the slide is showing reductions, so you want the column to be quite high. You want lots of reductions. So the downward slope over time for fuel cell vehicles, for example, was primarily a function of just the gasoline cars getting better. So gasoline got less carbon intensive, gasoline vehicles got more efficient, and so forth. On the other hand, the plug-in hybrids and the battery electric vehicles, electricity also got less carbon intensive, and the electric vehicle mix got a bit more efficient. And so that more than compensated from the raising bar of the improving gasoline vehicles. Now we can do the same thing for the 2020, but I do kind of want to wrap up before too long here and leave space for question and answers. There's about 15 slides. I'll tease it right at the end of my summary slide here, because as you would expect, COVID lots of other factors. Bill mentioned, Dr. Tall mentioned that, not just COVID happened, lots of things happened to the market at this time. Let me see if I can tease that out at the very end here. So if I go back to what we talked about so far, sensitivity analysis highlights the places where further research will be most valuable and impactful. And certainly that counterfactual behavior is a target. The out-of-state leakage that I mentioned, that's a target that would be very valuable. Optimizing emission reduction cost effectiveness is absolutely key to informing strategic thinking for these programs. But all along the way, I wanted to be the first to admit that doing so blindly or in isolation can have undesirable consequences, right? The increased rebate is increased for a reason. It has a different benefit than emissions reductions. It brings in a whole swath of consumers into the program and market that wouldn't have otherwise been in participation. So if we could put all of the benefits of a program into a single number, then we could kind of blindly optimize cost effectiveness, but that's not particularly realistic. We'll do the best we can, adding up all of those benefits, but when you try to combine them in one number, it gets tricky. So you may not even want to do that if you could. More to the point, it means you're always going to have some kind of multi-criteria analysis. You're going to have cost effectiveness on the one hand, and you're going to have another consideration to balance it against. The good news is we're better armed now to think about cost effectiveness, but the increased rebate brings in a swath of consumers. Similarly, the increased rebate may not be as cost effective as the standard rebate, but it may be more cost effective and larger scale than other equity programs. It's one of the largest scale ways to reach priority populations that we know of cost effectively. And it's doing that right now, but that may not be enough. The rebate, increased rebate, as big as it is, may not be enough for all people, or the process may be a barrier in and of itself. And that's where other programs, which have other features, which are not oriented at greenhouse gas savings, bring benefits. So the concierge service that helps consumers realize, you know what, I never thought of myself as a new car buyer, but I can get all the way to a new electric vehicle through the combination of these different incentives. That's another feature that needs to be weighed in the balance, right? So it's all relative to the multi-criteria and how the policymakers balance those things. Now, we all know gasoline cars are getting better, but it kind of plays out directly here. And there's kind of a nice rule of thumb in innovation theory. It may be a bit old, but the idea is that a technology from when it's invented to when it becomes obsolete, only about half of the improvements come in the normal course of improving the technology until it is seriously challenged in the marketplace by a competitor. And these 100% goals really are the first time I would argue that gasoline is being challenged, existentially and necessarily to meet the challenges of climate change. So we need to, of course, remember that gasoline will get better, and the LCFS and other policies are helping the fuels that those technologies use get better as well. So it's always going to be a bit of a raising bar, a moving target. Here's the simplest way I can think to sort of wrap up the conversation that we presented today, starting with the 2019 figures. Of course, we could include rebate type as well. But I did want to kind of hint at the 2020 results. Again, they're draft, not all the inputs have been finalized or blessed. But 2020 painted, I'll hide that for just a second. 2020 painted a different picture. So all of these things which we could kind of historically count on generally improving, the carbon intensity of electricity, the efficiency of battery electric vehicles, and rebate essentiality, didn't improve in 2020. And we've heard of actually all the reasons why, and so I don't have to repeat them. It's nice that I didn't know those issues were going to be highlighted, but they have a nice resonance. These all kind of come to a head for the battery electric vehicles. Those are the ones that use the most electricity. They're the ones that, rather than getting more and more efficient, are getting bigger and bigger batteries, which makes them more capable and more appealing, but not necessarily more efficient on a GHG basis. And they're also the ones that are being kept in that slightly lofty space of that Drs. Tall and CNCDA spoke about, where the prices aren't coming down, they're going up, where the rebate essential folks don't necessarily live. So the every woman EV, low cost EV that we might have all hoped was on the trajectory, well, 2020 did kind of put a stop to that trajectory, as everybody else has mentioned today. So that's very consistent with other things we've heard. I'll leave you with that teaser on 2020, and you can go look in the appendix if you want, but we'll have to finish this story on the next exciting episode of CVRP GHGs. The last thing I'll do is just walk you through the rest of the handout. We do make some specific recommendations in the weeds for what we learned when we were doing the calculations. We also offer up some more high-minded opportunities to advance the methodology even further, and it should go further. Change is always a little bit scary, but it represents learning and evolution. And speaking of the weeds, we've got about 36 slides of weeds here that just talk in more detail about what I presented today. And then last but not least, we've got some other presentations, and I bring these up because they provide additional context, not just on Cbrp in 2019 specifically, but on some of what we might talk about at the next workshop. So that second line there, consumer characteristics, I'm going to hope to present a few things from that presentation. And these are all data briefs, so they're much more bite-sized and accessible than this presentation today. But we're going to use those consumer characteristics to tee up some conversations about equity metrics and sort of what does it mean, not just for the technology to be market sustainable, but for the consumers to be market sustainable. So please do tune into that second workshop, and hopefully we'll have those conversations. So I'll just end it by saying, again, most of this is already online and available for free download, free to peruse at your leisure. I hope I have fulfilled the promise of the prologue and that at least a little bit of this is making more sense. Regardless, let me end how I began with thanks. And so thank you very much for your time and patient attention as I took you on this journey. Cheers.
Thank you, Brett. If anyone has any questions or comments on this presentation, please raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand feature, or press pound or #2 if you're joining by phone. It doesn't look like we have any raised hands or any questions in the Q&A box.
Please do feel free to follow up afterwards when you've had time to digest it.
Thank you, Brett. Nice job. Okay, giving it just another minute or two to see if any questions pop up. I've got a little bit of a lag on my end.
There are no questions, Lisa.
Great, thanks, Arya. All right, Raquel, we ready to move on to the next part?
Let me just get my screen back up here. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks for the chance to contribute to the conversation. Appreciate it.
All right, so now we'll transition and hear from Anthony Poggi with Carb on Clean Cars for All.
Thank you so much, Raquel. My name is Anthony Poggi. I'm the lead staff for the Clean Cars for All program here at Carb. I'm going to talk about a little bit of status of the program and some just statistics and go over some of the upcoming changes to the program as well. So Clean Cars for All is administered through participating air districts and focuses on providing incentives to lower income California drivers to scrap their older, high polluting vehicle and replace it with a zero or near zero emission vehicle. Options include the purchase of new or used hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or zero emission replacement vehicles. Furthermore, participants can choose an alternative mobility option such as an electric bike, a voucher for public transit, or a combination of clean transportation options allowed under the program in lieu of purchasing a replacement vehicle. Buyers of plug-in and hybrid and battery electric vehicles are also eligible for a home charger incentives or prepaid charge cards for public charging if a home charger installation is not an option for them. Participants must have a household income of less than 400% of the federal poverty limit, and that's about $106,000 for a family of 4. And they also must live in a zip code containing a disadvantaged community census tract. In addition, the program aims to focus the benefits to low income and disadvantaged communities. It has a heavy emphasis on consumer protections, education on the new technologies, and coordination with other clean transportation programs. With this focus in mind, 88% of all projects go to households below 225% of the federal poverty limit, which is about $60,000 for a family of four. To date, over 190 million has been allocated to the Clean Cars for All program. 75 million of this total is from the recent fiscal year 2021 to 2022 funding plan. The program has funded more than 12,000 vehicle replacement projects across 4 participating air districts, which include South Coast AQMD, San Joaquin APCD, Bay Area AQMD, and Sac Metro AQMD. Replacements include over 8,000 plug-in hybrids and zero-emission vehicles. If you include the projects funded solely by EFMP base funds, the total number of projects is over 13,000. In addition to vehicle replacements, Clean Cars for All has also funded over 150 EVSE installations. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, the most recent funding plan included $75 million for Clean Cars for All. 25 million of these funds were allocated evenly between South Coast, San Joaquin, and Bay Area air districts prior to the funding plan, as permitted by provisions in the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year funding plan. Carb staff is currently working on developing the necessary grant agreements so the districts can receive their full allocations as soon as possible. Because we were able to get that 25 million early to our 3 largest districts, 3 of the 4 air districts with existing programs are open to new applications. Sacramento Air District is currently closed to new applications as they continue to work through a backlog of existing applications. San Diego Air District has been awarded funding for the first time to begin implementation of their program. The most recent funding plan outlined changes for Clean Cars for All, including statewide expansion and enhancements to program flexibility. The funding plan authorized Carb's executive officer to make changes to Clean Cars for All prior to this coming year's funding plan. These changes include statewide expansion, modifying eligible technology types, and household income eligibility, as well as incentive amounts. Before any of these changes can be implemented, however, staff must update Clean Cars for All program guidelines. Staff expects the guidelines to be updated by April, after which implementing air districts may take steps to require only the cleanest vehicle technologies, lower the income cap, and offer increased incentive amounts. Timing for the implementation of statewide expansion will depend in part on the California state budget. The recent proposed budget bill includes promising allocations for Clean Cars for All, but it will not be official until it is passed by the legislature later this year. However, Carb staff is setting the stage through regulatory updates and development of the statewide solicitation to enable expansion as quickly as possible. Staff plans to release a copy of the solicitation materials for the statewide administrator in spring of this year and hold a public meeting to present and discuss the materials with stakeholders. Carb staff plans to open the solicitation for a statewide administrator in late spring or early summer. And with that, I will hand it off to Ali to talk about the financing assistance program.
Before we hand it over to Ali, do we want to just open it up to see if anybody has any questions on this particular Clean Cars for All material? Aria, do we have any raised hands or questions in the Q&A box?
No, Raquel, we have no raised hands or questions in the Q&A box.
Well, again, we will just make sure. Oh, looks like there is a question in the Q&A box from Christopher Chavez. It said, regarding Clean Cars for All, is there any update to the 1099 issue?
No updates at this time, Chris, beyond what we discussed at our public meeting a few weeks ago. We're continuing to explore options of potential ways to come to a coherent statewide policy on that issue. Thank you for asking.
Well, thank you, Anthony. Now we'll Move on and hear from Ali Kouassani, also with Carb, to provide updates on the Financing Assistance Program.
Thank you, Raquel, and good afternoon. My name is Ali Kouassani, and I'm the Financing Assistance for Lower Income Consumers Project Lead. And in the next few slides, I'm going to touch on the project goals, background, and plans. The goals of this pilot project are to improve access to affordable financing mechanism for lower income consumers to purchase or lease cleaner vehicles, and also to provide additional health, economic, and social benefits to their communities. The project also supports SB 1275 requirements for Carb to promote financing mechanisms to increase access to clean vehicles for low-income consumers, which for this project are defined as individuals with income of less than 400% of the federal poverty level. Established by Carb under the Green Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF, this project designed to provide financial resources, meaning low interest loans to help low income consumers to purchase advanced clean vehicles, and also by offering grants as purchase price buy downs at the point of sale. In addition, funding is available for consumers to purchase and install electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE, or for those who have EVSE installation barriers, the program offers charging credit and portable chargers. Next slide, please. We started the project by launching a Drive Clean Assistance Program, or DCAP, as a local pilot in Northern California back in 2015. California Community Housing Development Corporation, or CHDC, is a program administrator, and since then has helped us learn valuable lessons through a very high-touch consumer approach. 16 Northern California counties are being served by DCAP, and recently the program has experienced a rise in demand, which has slowed the processing of the applications a little bit down. In 2018, Beneficial Estate Foundation was selected to administer the statewide financing assistance program. BSF successfully launched the Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, or CVA program, in 2018, with having a strong presence and outreach partnership network in low-income communities across the state. CVA program experienced a warm welcome and strong demand, such that after only 4 months of the program availability, all the funds exhausted and the program closed. CVA program was relaunched in February 2020 with major changes and updates to the program and with additional funds. But despite the current health and economic crisis, BSF successfully managed a steadily growing demand until the end of third quarter of 2020, when a surge of applications slowed down the process and eventually forced us to establish a reservation list on March 17, 2021, and eventually close the program on April 14th, 2021. So far, more than 43 million has been allocated to the program, which helped to pay for more than 4,600 vehicles grants, more than 1,700 EVSEs, and facilitated more than 1,500 low interest loans. Next slide, please. On January 17, 2021, staff held a work group meeting and discussed findings of piloting the project over the past few years, and proposed making major changes to the program, including replacing the first come first served model with a needs-based model, in which we can better serve low-income consumers more effectively and avoid program closures. Partnering with more CBOs and communities across the state to help educate and enable more low-income consumers to participate in the program, as well as broadening our financial partners to offer more competitive, fair financing services, as well as implementing vehicle purchase price cap, loan cap, and lowering income eligibility were among other proposals, which vastly supported by stakeholders. Staff plan to release a new solicitation sometime in March 2020 with new project criteria and relaunch a program mid-2020. In the meantime, we are working with our statewide program administrator to serve the applications on the waitlist from last year's fiscal year. That concludes my presentation. I'll hand it back to Raquel.
All right, thank you, Ali. And I think we'll take that opportunity to open it up now for Q&A, final Q&A and next steps. So before we go into next steps, again, please use the raise hand function or press #2 if you're calling in by phone if you have any questions or comments you'd like to submit. Also use the Q&A box. And just as a reminder, please state your name and affiliation before asking a question or making a comment. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aria to manage any raised hands or questions in the box.
Thank you, Raquel. It looks like we have one raised hand. Piet, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, it's Piet Cannon from Ecology Action. So Ali, you talked about working more with local CBOs throughout the state. Can you talk more about what that would look like and how you'd work with the CBOs, and would the CBOs be compensated to help in this work?
Yeah, of course. So throughout the course of implementing the project over the last few years, we came to the conclusion that the first come, first serve is not the right model for this program. And we need to rely more on CBOs and communities just to bring us into the weeds needs of the communities. And we recognize and acknowledge that every community's needs and characteristics might be different from the others. So we started piloting a small scale pilot program in the current statewide program to work with a few CBOs in Southern California to test how does it work for consumers to start the process at the community level, working with those people who they know them and trust them. And then by the time they get to the program and submit their applications, they are ready to go. So we got really good results, but there is more room for improvements and some tunings. And this is going to be one of the areas that we are going to discuss in the upcoming work group meetings on how to work with community-based organizations and our partners at the state level to benefit from their contributions. So there's going to be a lot of discussions and conversations around that. And we are looking for the feedback from stakeholders.
Thank you.
And I think, Piet, just to add on that a little bit more too, when we work with CBOs currently in our grants, we do ensure that they're compensated for the work that they do. So that we're looking for partners to come to the table. We know there's work associated with it. And we know that CBOs, they're doing great work in communities, and we want to make sure that they have the support from us that they need to be able to carry out the tasks that we're hoping they can help us with.
It doesn't look like we have any more raised hands or questions in the Q&A box.
We'll move on to. So before we end today, I did just want to briefly go over some of the next steps for the funding plan and the light duty long-term plan development. As I mentioned earlier, next week, staff will hold the first clean mobility investments focused work group for the long-term plan, which will be followed by additional work group discussions over the next several months. We do plan to hold 2 more light duty focused workshops, one in late March covering the sustainable ZEV market and an equitable transition to electric, and another workshop in late May focused on the long-term vision for our light duty EV purchase incentive programs. As a reminder, the governor's May revised budget is expected by mid-May, and staff will be holding various public work groups and workshops into the summer. All of this will culminate with the release of our proposed fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan, with the long-term plan included for consideration at a board hearing later this year. And I know we did throw a lot at you today, so please take the time to digest, go over everything. As we mentioned, all the presentations are available online. And in the meantime, you know, if any questions do come up on the long-term plan or on any of our vehicle purchase incentives, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I've included contact information here for the program leads that you've heard from today. And anything that's specific to the long-term plan, please shoot those emails my direction. Again, we highly recommend that you sign up for our Gov Delivery listserv to make sure that you are getting emails from us about any upcoming meetings. So if we don't have any other raised hands or questions in the Q&A box, I think we'll wrap up a little early today. Aria, do we have any?
We have one comment in the Q&A box, and I just want to say thank you, Lonnie. I would like to thank Carb for putting on this presentation.
Thank you, Lonnie. And I want to give a special thank you to all of our presenters today and everyone who participated in the discussion. We definitely look forward to working together with you all this year as we prepare this update to the long-term plan and kind of re-envision our vehicle purchase incentives for the next few years. So thank you again for participating and have a great afternoon.